Hi, and welcome to this month's Thoughts on Leadership. The title for this month is Trust. Just the one word. And I want to talk about trust, but I'm going to put a different angle on it. But first, let's just understand what is trust. I took a dictionary definition off the website here. It says, reliance on the integrity, strength, ability, surety, etc., of a person or thing. Confidence. So trust is about that confidence and about that relying on something or somebody. Whenever I ask people about what makes a good leader, to think, particularly when I say, think of a leader in your life, and what is the qualities that they've been that's endeared you to them. And people have always will bring up trust at some stage with it. And the word is related to leadership on a regular basis. In fact, based on my early research that I did talking to people who work for great leaders, this was something that came up over and over again. And if you think about it, it is closely aligned to integrity, because in order to have integrity, the person must have some trust in them. And now let's not get too confused. We can have integrity with someone, which is very, very powerful, and then they trust them. That trust placed in them can be for the wrong reasons. So even amongst thieves, for instance, there's an expression, honor amongst thieves. Thieves will have trust in one another. In fact, we can trust somebody to do something that's illegal or is wrong, because we know the person they are, and that's what their bent is. So we can have that element of trust, which then engenders integrity. But for this session, I want to look at trust from a slightly different angle. I want to examine trust in terms of the inner trust. In other words, do you trust yourself? It's really a very powerful question. You may be sitting there and saying, well, of course I trust myself. Do you? Because when I do talk to people about qualities of leaders, they also say something else. They say that leaders are decisive, they make decisions, they know when to make a move on something, and when having committed themselves to making a move on something, they then get on and deal with it, and if it's the wrong decision, they also deal with that. In other words, they don't sit there in this zone of indecisiveness. And I believe the key to being able to be decisive is that ability to trust in yourself. And the point I'm wanting to make to you is that this is not something that you're just born with. You don't sit there, some people were born being decisive and others weren't. It is a skill, it is acquired, and it is learned, and it is developed within yourself. So let's just think about this word trust, and let's think about it in terms of how we trust ourselves. Let's go back to being a child. Every one of us at some stage learned to walk. If you watch a child learning to walk, it goes to that stage when it's just on 2 feet and it doesn't know quite what to do. And then it goes to that stage when it starts to walk, but it has to hold on to you. Hold on to maybe your finger with both hands. And maybe after a while it'll hold on with one hand. But I guarantee you, the moment you pull your hand away, the child stops, won't take another step. The child just falls. Why? Because they haven't trusted themselves yet to make those steps without holding on to you. And finally the child learns that trust. They finally let go and actually make a step and realize that they can make this step. And then they go on to make more steps. And finally they are capable of walking. It's a process they go through, a process of learning to trust oneself in this area of one's life. And even though the child may have been walking for a few days and one day the walking doesn't work, they fall over. They get up and they go, hang on a minute, it didn't work, but that's because something happened. And they learn to overcome that and get back because they know in themselves they can do it. So anybody who's learned to walk, learned to ride a bicycle, learned to do anything, maybe you cook, maybe you drive a car, whatever it is that you do, that's a skill that you've had to learn, and the process of learning has meant that you have had to learn to trust yourself. In fact, I believe that there's stages to go through in this. And we need to understand what those stages are. But let's just go back to my child example for just one more minute. When did the trust happen? When the child made the first step? No. When the child decided to give it a go without holding on. The trust happened before the action. In other words, when we learn to trust ourselves, it's something we do before we take the action. Once we've taken the action, we have already found the trust. It's time to move on. So, what are the steps that we need to take in terms of being able to make decisions and trusting ourselves in making decisions? I'm going to take you through a few of those steps that I've discovered. And this is what my experience has been in talking to leaders and listening to them, trying to understand exactly what it is that they do that's got them to being in a position where they trust themselves to make a decision, and they become decisive, and they move on. So number one is to collect all available and relevant information together from which to make a decision. Okay. So getting that information, pulling it together, finding out what's relevant and what's not relevant, because that's an important part of that process, is dividing out fiction from fact. You know, what is relevant here, what isn't. What's factual, what's vague, what's not maybe absolutely true, what's not even relevant in some way. So a leader will draw the facts to themselves in order to make the decision. Next, number two, is listen to the perception of others and those concerned. Whoever this is going to influence, what's their perceptions of the situation? What do they see as what's going on? And notice the word listen. Listen and hear what's being said by them, not what you think you hear. Part of being a good leader is to actually learn to listen to what people are saying. Many people make problems for themselves in being decisive because they can become over-decisive. In other words, this is what I want to believe, now let me find the evidence to justify that. As opposed to, let me genuinely listen to what everybody's point of view is. Then we move into number three, and that is what I call seek wise counsel. In other words, finding people that can give you good advice. Now maybe the advice is because they've got some specific expertise that they can share with you. Maybe they're an expert at a particular subject, or they know something about it. But also expertise can be somebody who can, jostle you a bit. In other words, make you think for yourself, challenge your thinking, make you think about it in a different way. Maybe challenge you that you're being too judgmental or not judgmental enough, that you're not being objective enough. Anybody who's in wise counsel with you or somebody who you know by listening to them, there is wisdom in there which you can rely on. So it's putting that wise counsel together. In both 2 and 3 that I'm talking about there, I want to make a point. There's no shame to seeking advice. Many people in leadership positions think, well, I am a leader, so I shouldn't have to ask for advice. I'm a leader because I know it. Dangerous ground. One of the things people don't like is a know-it-all. It puts them off being a follower of somebody who they're looking at as being their leader. So, there's no shame in getting people's comments and advice. Here's a big point that was made to me many, many years ago. You don't have to take the advice, but just getting their perception of it gives you a new dimension. And that dimension allows you to make a decision more effectively. And then the last thing is making the decision and moving on. In other words, I've got the information. I've thought it through. I've heard the arguments. Now I'm going to go with it. I'm going to make a decision. And I'm going to move on. And if that decision isn't perfect, it doesn't matter. Because it's better to have made a decision and then correct it as we move on than it is to try and wait and find the perfect answer. Let me tell you something I've learned from every leader that I've ever interviewed, talked to, discussed this issue with. There's no right decisions. If you wait for the perfect decision, it will not arrive. And in fact, waiting for it is a poor decision. I always remember one of Richard Branson's people that I watched an interview with, where he said it's better to make a decision and get it wrong and put it right than it is not to have made a decision at all. So make a decision, move on, and make it happen. Having done all of this, then live with it. Get on with it. Make it happen. If it's the right decision, well then that's great. You can move through and you can build on it. If it's the wrong decision, well then learn from it. Because intuition comes from that something you develop by over time. You get an intuition for what is right and what is wrong, and you're constantly honing that intuition, getting it right, making it work. I think if you think of those 4 steps, and admittedly some of those have to be done in a short time frame, but what is the collective information I need here? What is the wise counsel that I would like to bounce the ideas off or get their input to it? Having done all those things, make a decision and live with it. And part of that decision, actually making the decision, is always useful to consider the downside. What's it going to cost if it goes wrong? How could I put it right? What's the cost of getting it wrong compared to not doing it at all? And people think about the cost in terms of repairing the mistake. There's a cost in not having made the decision, that the competitor comes along and makes it, or somebody else comes along and makes it, and you lose your position in the process. So those considerations need to fit in there. Here's a few tips for you that I've picked up along the way. When doing this, never be bogged down with people saying, oh, well, we tried that once before and it didn't work. Something that didn't work last year, it doesn't mean it's not going to work this year. All it meant is it didn't work last year. So don't always be put off by those sort of comments. Don't allow them to cloud your judgment. Another little tip for you. Sometimes the decision is actually easier than you're making it. Often you can get so bogged down in it, trying to analyze it and overanalyze it, that you just lose focus of what you're trying to do. And it's actually a lot simpler. So sometimes it's just good to step away and say, well, what are we really trying to do here? What is the decision that really needs to be made? And my favorite, a good question to ask in that moment of decision making. Here's a little barometer. Is this going to take us towards our vision or our mission or our objectives? Is it in line with our mission, vision, and objectives? And often we find when it comes to decision making, that question itself makes us go, this has got nothing to do with what we're about. And we can just move beyond having to even make the decision. We can just push the whole thing out of the way. So I'm going to ask you some questions, as I always do every month. Question time. These questions are there to challenge you, challenge your thinking, make you stop and think. You may sit there and say, I'm a good decision maker, Paul. And that's great. Well done. There's more of those who don't than there are of those that do. Equally, you may be one of those, and I've seen a few, who are very good decision makers, they think. In fact, they irrationally make decisions, and they need to temper it in the other way, and that is not jumping to conclusions. So whichever side the balance that you're on, the questions for this month are, do you trust yourself to make decisions? And have you developed your intuition? And are you honing your skill as an ongoing process? Not as something that you've mastered, but as something that you're constantly honing and making better and purifying in some way. When making decisions, are you really somebody who listens and remains objective to the situation? Or do you too often allow your emotions to have subconsciously made the decision, and now you're looking for the evidence to prove that you're right? Do you seek the correct counsel, the people around you that can guide you and give you information? Do you seek people that will challenge you back and make you be objective and consider the situation? Have you managed to gather the relevant information, and have you considered the cost of it going wrong? And then have you considered the cost of not doing it at all? And have you weighed those up in the process? And finally, of course, are you making this decision in line with the goals, the objectives of the business? I hope this month's been interesting to you. I hope it's made you stop and think, because that's what Thoughts on Leadership is about. Make you stop and think about your leadership style. For those of you who struggle in this area, I hope it's given you some guidance and ideas and challenged your thinking to give it a go and start the process of learning. Take those steps as a toddler has done, as you did at some stage in your life. Make the tentative steps. Learn to trust yourself. When you have mastered the trust within yourself, the action will follow. Don't think that the action comes and then the trust. When the action comes, the trust gets enhanced. It becomes better, it becomes fuller. But it needs you to have the initial trust to get it off the ground. I hope you have a great month. Challenge yourself. Think about your leadership style. And remember, this video we do every month, our Thoughts on Leadership, is free. So if you've got friends or people that you think may find this useful, please feel free to tell them how to subscribe and how to get the information. It's also available in a written format where you can just download it and read it. Have a great month. I look forward to seeing you next month. All the best. Bye now.